In just one cruel moment, Marcus Bennett throws his pregnant wife out of their home and tells their children a devastating lie. Your mother left you. What he doesn't know is that the very woman he discarded has just inherited a $30 billion empire from her father. Broken, betrayed, and pushed to her lowest point, Claire chooses silence instead of revenge, waiting patiently for the perfect moment to rise. And when she finally steps into a room full of powerful people, Marcus realizes the biggest mistake of his life. The lesson? Never underestimate the quiet strength of someone who has been pushed aside. Silence can be power, patience can be strategy, and the greatest comeback often comes when no one expects it. If this story moved you, please support the channel with one like and one share so we can keep bringing you more powerful stories like this. Thanks for watching.
The day Marcus Bennett moved his new woman into their master bedroom, he knelt down before his 3 children. He looked each of them in the eye and told them a lie. Your mother has left you. Meanwhile, his wife, who was 7 months pregnant, was just a short distance away, holding the hand of her father as he passed away. She had no idea that the locks on her own home had been changed. She had no idea another woman was now sleeping in her bed. And she had no clue at all that in just 72 hours, she would become one of the most powerful and wealthy women in America. The one thing Marcus did not know, the thing no one in that house knew, was that Claire's father was Richard Ashford, the one and only Richard Ashford, with an empire worth $30 billion in real estate, investments, and trusts, and every last share, every building, and every single cent of that fortune had just been signed over to one person, his daughter, the very woman Marcus had just kicked out of her own home, the very woman whose grandmother's handmade quilt was now stuffed into a trash bag in the garage, the very woman whose 11-year-old son was hiding under his bed, quickly copying down his height measurements from the wall before the new woman could paint over them. But this is what makes this story completely different from any tale of revenge you have ever come across. Claire did not yell. She did not make a single phone call. She did not plead to be allowed back home. First, she buried her father. Then she read through every single document. She had meetings with every single lawyer. And after that, she walked into a room filled with 600 of the most influential people in the country, stepped onto a stage, and watched her husband's expression as he finally understood who he had thrown away. And the next thing she did is something he will never, ever get over. This story will guide you through 3 different times when Claire was pushed to her absolute lowest point. You will see 2 moments where she believed she had finally won, only to lose it all over again. And it all leads to one final scene that will make you want to jump to your feet and cheer. Stay right here with me. Every detail of this story matters. Here is the powerful truth that this story will reveal to you. Silence does not mean weakness. Patience does not mean you have given up. And the most powerful person in any room is not the one who is the loudest. She is the one who waits for the right moment, when her words will have the most impact. If you have ever been made to feel small, been ignored, or been pushed aside by someone who should have recognized your true value, this story is for you. If this story is speaking to you, please do me a quick favor. Go ahead and click that subscribe button so that you do not miss what happens next. Please leave a comment and tell me, at what point did you realize it was already too late for Marcus? Was it when he changed the locks, threw out the quilt, or when she gave her speech? I read each and every comment, and your thoughts always give me a new perspective. Share this with someone who really needs to hear it. And if you are still with me at the very end, you will truly understand how the quietest waters can carve the deepest canyons. I will see you in the next chapter. The day Marcus Bennett brought his mistress to live in their house, he got down on his knees in front of his 3 children and told them their mother had walked out on them. He had convinced himself this was true. For 3 days, he had practiced saying it in the bathroom mirror, working on his tone, trying to make his eyes look sad, and perfecting the look of a man who wants to seem heartbroken while feeling nothing at all. And by the time he gave his performance in the living room of the house his wife had spent 10 years creating, he had said it to himself so many times that the lie felt like the truth. But 14 floors below them, in the lobby of a skyscraper in Manhattan, 4 lawyers in expensive suits were walking into an elevator. They all had leather briefcases. They did not talk to anyone. And they were carrying the papers that would completely tear Marcus Bennett's life apart before he even sat down for dinner. But this story does not begin in that lobby. It does not begin with lawyers or legal documents or the quiet work of justice. It begins 11 years earlier, with a woman who spent a decade making herself smaller for a man who never once appreciated her true strength. If you think you can predict what happens next, please keep listening, because you are in for a surprise. The house on Willow Creek Lane in Charlotte, North Carolina, was Claire's creation, from the very first board to the very last window treatment. She had personally picked out every single color, a gentle gray in the halls, a clean white border on all the windows, and a country-style kitchen with wooden countertops that she had sanded and treated herself during a long weekend when Marcus was away at a work event in Chicago. She chose the light fixtures from a specialty shop outside of Asheville, making the 2-hour trip each way with Ethan safely in his car seat. She even installed 3 of them by herself before Marcus got home and casually asked why the dining room looked a little different. She honestly had not expected him to even notice. She put up the 4th light fixture after he had gone to sleep. The children's art was displayed in the hallway, not simply taped to the refrigerator like most people do, but properly mounted in simple white frames that she had bought together. This was because Claire knew that when you frame a child's artwork, you're sending a message that what they create is important, and she knew that children never forget that feeling. Ethan, who was 7, had made a drawing of a rocket with 6 engines and a flag on top that read Mom. Lily, who was 5, had painted a garden where the flowers were bigger than the house, in colors that you could never find in nature, and they were all the more wonderful for it. And 2-year-old Jack had created a purple circle with 2 dots that he strongly insisted was his dog, named Truck. On the back of every single drawing, Claire had written the child's name, the date, and a little note about the story they had told her about their creation. She was that kind of mother, the kind who treasured the things that other people might overlook, because she understood that those little things are almost always the big things. On the refrigerator, held up by a magnet shaped like North Carolina, was a shopping list in her handwriting, perfectly arranged by grocery store aisle. Her reading glasses were neatly folded on her nightstand next to a novel she was halfway through, still open to page 204, because she had not had a quiet moment to read more. Her slippers were at the end of the bed, placed perfectly side by side, a habit she did every morning without a second thought. And on the kitchen windowsill was a small frame that had been there for so long that it was now invisible to everyone but her. Inside was a quote she had written out on a note card. "A woman who can get through small troubles will be able to survive the big ones." Her grandmother had told her that when she was only 9 years old. They were standing in the kitchen of a lake house in Vermont, and she was learning to make pie dough with cold hands, because the butter had to be cold, which meant her fingers had to be cold as well. Claire had written it down that very night in a journal she kept by her bed, and she had held on to those words through every tough year since, the way some people hold on to a prayer. The house smelled of her, a mix of vanilla and fresh laundry, and a certain warmth that people could never quite identify. It smelled like a home that was truly lived in, and loved, and looked after by hands that really cared. And none of that, not the warmth, not the 10 years of a woman pouring her soul into the four walls and the family within them. None of it was enough to stop what was about to walk through that front door. Here is something important to remember. You might even want to write this down. The first sign of trouble in a relationship is never the big, obvious thing. It is the small thing that you try to find an excuse for, the dinner that he is late for, the phone that he always places face down on the table, the kiss that he used to give you on the lips, but now only gives you on the forehead. Always pay attention to the small things. They are trying to tell you something that your heart is not yet willing to accept. Claire had 3 children. Ethan was 11, tall for his age, and he had his mother's calm brown eyes and a way of watching things that often made adults feel a bit self-conscious when they forgot he was in the room. He read books that were meant for people who were twice his age. He remembered every single detail, and he always knew more than he said. Claire called him her old soul, and she meant it as the highest form of praise she could give, because she had been one too. Lily was 8, a gentle and artistic child, who was in tune with feelings that most adults could no longer perceive. She was constantly drawing birds in a notebook that Claire had bought for her. On the cover, in Lily's own writing, it said, "Lily's Bird Book." She would cry whenever adults would argue, even if it was quiet, and even if it was in another room with the door shut. Because Lily could sense bad feelings, the way some people can sense a change in the weather. And baby Jack was 3 years old and lived in a state of happy chaos that Claire found both tiring and very amusing. He ate crayons. He once shouted, "Daddy!" at the mailman in front of 4 of their neighbors, and Claire had to explain to Margaret Henderson from across the street that no, the mailman was not Jack's father. Jack simply called every grown man Daddy, including the cashier at the grocery store and, one very memorable time, a mannequin in a department store. He loved his mother with the intense, unconditional, and absolute devotion of a toddler who has not yet learned that love can be a complicated thing. Claire was 7 months pregnant. She would walk through the house with one hand resting on her stomach, talking softly to the baby when she thought no one was listening. She would tell the baby about the weather, about what she was making for dinner, and about the really nice picture of a cardinal that Lily had drawn that morning. Ethan heard her once. He was standing in the hall just outside the kitchen, listening to his mother speak to someone who was not yet able to reply. He did not say anything. He simply stood there with a look of old sadness in his 11-year-old eyes. And then he walked away. Claire had met Marcus Bennett at a college reunion in Boston on a rainy Thursday evening in October. Marcus had a charm that was completely natural. You know, the type of man, the kind who walks into a room and it instantly feels warmer. He had a big, friendly smile and a talent for listening that made you feel like you were the only person in the world. He was driven and funny, and when you are falling for someone, that ambition is electric. Claire was already falling for him before she even finished her second drink. When it was just the two of them, away from everyone else, he showed a softer, surprisingly gentle side. He would tenderly push a strand of hair from her face while she was talking. The second time they went out, he remembered exactly how she took her coffee without even asking. He laughed at her jokes, the ones no one else ever seemed to get. And that is the most powerful kind of attraction, the kind that makes you feel truly seen. She fell completely in love with every part of him. It was the way people fall in love when they are young and full of hope, believing that the person they see at the beginning is who they will be forever. But Marcus had no idea about the one thing Claire had kept to herself. Her father was Richard Ashford. Anyone who followed American business over the last 30 years knew that name. Forbes magazine once described him as the most powerful, quiet giant in real estate. He had built his entire empire piece by piece, one deal at a time, over 3 decades of hard work and patience. He refused to take shortcuts, which cost him some early deals, but made him a legend in the long run. Richard Ashford's fortune was so large, most people could not even imagine it. But Claire's childhood was much different than you would think. After her mother passed away when she was only 6, her grandmother Helen raised her. She grew up in a cozy lake house in Vermont, not the giant gated mansion in Greenwich. It was a simple 4-bedroom home on a peaceful lake, where their closest neighbor was a sweet retired teacher who brought them fresh pie every Sunday. Helen Ashford always said that money without character was not a gift, but a curse that fools you until it is too late. Claire once watched her grandmother kneading bread dough, her hands strong and weathered, as she said, "Money you did not earn for yourself will only do one of 2 things. It will make you lazy, or it will make you a target. Always make your own first. Then," her grandmother continued, "you will always know the difference between the people who love you and the people who love what your family name can give them." Claire held on to that advice, tucking it away in a safe place in her heart. It sat right next to her grandmother's secret pie crust recipe and the memory of the sun rising over the lake in the fall. She never forgot it. So she simply told Marcus that her father worked in real estate. She introduced them over a quiet lunch just before the wedding. For exactly 1 hour, Richard Ashford sat across from Marcus. He had 1 cup of coffee, asked a total of 4 questions, and barely said anything else. That evening, he flew back home. Later that night, as Claire was doing dishes, her father stood in the doorway and spoke quietly. "He loves how you make him feel." He paused, then added, "Just make sure he also loves who you are when you are not making him feel anything at all." Claire just nodded, thinking she understood what he meant. She would spend the next 11 years discovering that her father saw something in that single hour that she had failed to see for years. Their first few years of marriage were wonderful, filled with warmth and the promise of a bright future they were building together, side by side. Claire built a small consulting business from the ground up, 1 client at a time. She raised their 3 children, Kofi, Lily, and then Jack. She turned their house into a true home. She thought she was happy, but looking back, she was happy while Marcus was just comfortable. She did not realize yet that those were 2 very different things. The change began around year 7. Marcus was promoted and started staying at the office later, which seemed normal enough. In year 8, he started picking at little things, like how she dressed. "You used to put in more effort," he would say. He criticized her parenting, telling her she was too soft on their son. By year 9, he stopped reaching for her in bed at night. When she reached for him, he would just say he was tired. It was a kind of exhaustion that had nothing to do with sleep, and everything to do with where his heart was wandering. Then came year 10. Claire learned she was pregnant with their 4th child. She told Marcus the news over dinner, feeling a mix of nerves and hope she had not felt since they were first married. He just paused for a moment and then said, "Okay." He was not happy. He was not angry. He was just empty. It was the kind of emptiness you see in a man who is already planning his escape route, not realizing everyone can already see the blueprints. 14 months before the day that shattered Claire's world, a woman named Vanessa Cole joined Marcus's firm. She was 31 years old, a junior partner who was sharp, perfectly put together, and had a special talent for one thing: finding men who had incredible women at home and were starting to forget their worth. She did not try to charm Marcus in an obvious way. That is not how women like Vanessa work. She just listened to him. She asked him questions about his dreams and his goals, things Claire had stopped asking about years ago. It was not because Claire had stopped caring. It was because she already knew all the answers. But Vanessa made his old stories feel brand new again. She would say things like, "Your wife is a very lucky woman. I really hope she knows that." Or, "You seem like the kind of man who always gives more than he gets. And then she delivered the line that hit him the hardest. I just feel like you deserve someone who can match your level of ambition. And Marcus, who had an amazing woman at home, packing his kids' lunches, building a life for him, and carrying his fourth child, actually heard those words and believed them. Because the most convincing lies are always the ones we desperately want to be true. And then there was Marcus's mother, Diane. She had been waiting 10 years for a moment of weakness, and when she saw it, she came pouring in like a flood. Diane had never truly liked Claire, not from the very beginning. It was not because of anything Claire had done. It was because Claire was not the woman Diane had pictured for her perfect son. Claire was too strong, too independent. Her quiet nature suggested a deep confidence, not a desire to be controlled. Diane wanted a daughter-in-law she could mold into what she wanted, but Claire had already been shaped by people much wiser than Diane. She carried herself with grace and never apologized for who she was, and Diane resented her for it. She would plant little seeds of doubt in Marcus's mind during Sunday dinners and late-night calls. She would say that Claire seemed distant, or that she was being secretive about their finances. She claimed Claire's first loyalty was to her own family, not to them. She said it all softly, and she said it often, like someone planting a seed and just patiently watering it, waiting for it to grow. The night everything broke for Claire was a Wednesday in March. She was standing at the kitchen sink washing the last of the dinner dishes. She was 7 months pregnant. Her feet were painfully swollen, and her back had that dull, constant ache that every pregnant woman knows. It is not quite sharp enough to complain about, but it is never gone enough to ignore. The kids were all asleep, and the house was finally quiet. Soft music was playing from a little speaker on the windowsill, something she had put on to make the big kitchen feel a little less lonely. That is when Marcus's phone, which he had left on the counter, buzzed. He had just stepped outside to take out the trash, leaving his phone unlocked and face up. The screen lit up before she had a chance to look away. It was a text from Vanessa. Just 4 words. She does not deserve you. A second later, another message appeared right below it. Come over tonight. Claire carefully put the phone back down on the counter. She handled it the way you would handle something you are terrified to drop, not because it might break, but because your own hands suddenly feel weak and shaky. She did not grab the phone again. She did not run outside to confront Marcus. Instead, she walked calmly to the bathroom, turned on the cold water, and gripped the sides of the sink with both hands. She just stared at her own face in the mirror. 7 months pregnant, in the home she had built, reading a text from a woman she had never even met. A woman telling her husband that she was not good enough for him. She started counting her breaths. 1, 2, 3. She needed something to count, something she could control in a moment where everything else was spinning out of control. She took 12 deep breaths. Then, she splashed cold water on her face, dried it, and walked back into the kitchen. She turned off the music and finished making his nightly cup of tea. 1 sugar, no milk, steeped for exactly 4 minutes. She set it on the counter for when he came back inside. When Marcus came back in, he saw her standing there with his tea, ready. He did not say a word, and she did not say a word back. He picked up the mug and walked into the living room. They did not speak again for the rest of the night. When you first discover a betrayal like this, your immediate reaction is to scream, to cry, to demand an explanation right then and there. But here's the secret no one ever tells you. The second you confront someone without a solid plan, you give away all of your power. You give them the chance to make excuses, to lie, or even worse, to twist things around and blame you. And suddenly, you are the one left holding the pieces of the bomb they just threw into your life. So, if you can, and I know how incredibly hard this is, just wait. Do not wait forever, but wait long enough to get your thoughts in order. Wait long enough to make sure that when you finally do decide to speak, your words will have power. In the weeks that followed, Claire became very quiet, but Marcus completely misunderstood why. He assumed she was giving up. He thought it was just the usual unhappiness that either leads to a big fight or a silent retreat. He thought she was retreating. He never noticed that the silence between them had changed. Claire had stopped trying to start conversations, the kind he would just cut short anyway. She no longer reached for his side of the bed in the middle of the night, but she did begin to make more phone calls, always stepping outside onto the porch, her voice quiet and steady, a sound that was completely her own. As Marcus watched her pull away from him, the only thing he felt was relief. And that single emotion, that quiet, simple, instant relief, told Claire everything she had been terrified to admit. When the person you love begins to drift away, you are not supposed to feel relieved. You are supposed to feel terrified. The fact that Marcus felt relief meant their marriage was already over in every single way that mattered. She was simply the last one to finally accept the truth. The phone call that changed her life came on a Tuesday afternoon. Claire was in the kitchen, packing her daughter Lily's lunch for the next day. She was humming a song she had heard on the radio that morning. Then her phone rang. The screen read, Thomas Whitfield, and her stomach lurched before her mind could even catch up. Thomas Whitfield was her father's lawyer, and he would never, ever call on a Tuesday unless something was terribly wrong. Richard Ashford had experienced a massive stroke at his estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. He had been discovered in his study, slumped over in his chair with his reading glasses still on his face. In that moment, Claire shifted. She always navigated hardship with quiet speed and total focus. She never wasted energy on anything that wasn't the next immediate, necessary step. Within an hour, she had a bag packed. She contacted the school regarding Ethan and Lily. She cooked and prepared 5 days' worth of meals, which she labeled and neatly stacked in the freezer. She wrote Marcus a clear note about their son Jack's pediatrician appointment on Thursday, an appointment that had already been rescheduled 2 times. She clipped the doctor's number and Jack's insurance card to the front of the refrigerator. Before her taxi arrived, she stood in the living room where Marcus was watching television. She told him calmly and clearly what had happened, where she was headed, and about how long she would probably be gone. She asked him to please make sure Jack made it to that appointment. Marcus kissed her on the forehead, said he was sorry to hear about her father, and then watched the taxi drive away. One of his hands rested on the curtain, and the other was already reaching for his phone. By the very next morning, he had already called a locksmith. He stood there, in his bathrobe, watching a stranger replace every single lock on every outside door, and he did not feel a single drop of guilt. He had created a story in his head by then, a story that his sister Vanessa had helped him write, and his mother Diane had helped him decorate. And in that story, Claire had chosen her father's world over their world. He told himself he was simply reacting to a choice she had already made. That is the danger when a man is slowly convinced by the wrong people that he is the real victim. He begins to believe his own story so completely that it stops feeling like a lie and starts to feel like the gospel truth. On that Sunday afternoon, Diane, his mother, arrived first. She walked through the front door, holding casserole dishes and wearing a wide, comfortable smile that had never once felt warm to Claire in 11 years. She put her dishes on the kitchen counter and began to explore the house the way she had always dreamed of doing. She opened cabinets, ran her hand along countertops, and stood in doorways with the smug expression of a woman who was finally in charge. Greg, her husband, arrived next, quiet and awkward as always, carrying boxes from a moving truck parked out on the street. He stumbled over the front step, grabbed the door frame to catch his balance, and muttered something under his breath. Greg was not an evil man, That should be made very clear. He was simply a man who had practiced the habit of staying quiet in the name of family loyalty for so long that he could no longer tell the difference between that and plain cowardice. And then, stepping out of that moving van was Vanessa. She was wearing a silk blouse, the color of dark red wine, and carrying 2 Louis Vuitton suitcases, as if she had already earned the right to be there. She walked straight through the front door, straight down the hallway, and straight into Claire's bedroom. The sound of hangers sliding across the closet rod drifted back into the living room, like the sound of someone's life being quietly erased. Marcus knelt down in the center of the living room. In Claire's living room, the one with the framed drawings from the children on the wall, and her grandmother's quilt visible on the bed. He looked at each of his children with a special kind of calm that only a man who has completely convinced himself he is doing the right thing can have. "Your mother made a choice," he said. "She chose her father's world over this family. She is not coming back, but I am here, and I am not going anywhere." Diane nodded behind him like a church deacon confirming a sermon. Greg stared at the floor and stood perfectly still. Baby Jack was on Lily's hip because she had picked him up the moment the air in the room grew heavy, the way she always did, as if she could shield him from things she did not yet understand herself. And Ethan, who was 11 years old, stood at the bottom of the stairs. He stared at his father for a very long time. He did not cry. He did not speak. He just looked at him with steady, calculating eyes and said absolutely nothing. Then he turned, walked upstairs, and closed his bedroom door with the quiet, deliberate finality of a boy who had just learned something about his father that he could never forget. In Greenwich, Connecticut, inside a private hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and the fresh flowers that the nurses changed every morning, Claire held her father's hand. Richard Ashford's breathing was shallow and uneven. His face was still in a way she had never seen on a man who had spent his entire life in motion, in boardrooms, on construction sites, walking the floors of buildings he had first imagined and then brought into existence. On the bedside table sat a sealed envelope. Claire's name was written on the front in her father's neat handwriting, the same handwriting that had signed every birthday card, every note slipped under her dorm room door in college, and every letter she had kept in a wooden box in her closet for 20 years. She did not open it on the first day. She talked to him instead. She told him all about Ethan's science project, a model of the solar system made from painted styrofoam balls and wire hangers that had taken over the entire dining room table for 2 weeks. She told him about Lily's birds, how she had started drawing cardinals because she had seen one outside her window every morning and decided it was visiting her specifically. She told him about Jack and the funny incident with the mailman, and she thought she saw a flicker of amusement cross her father's face. She told him about the new baby, how the baby kicked at 2 o'clock in the morning every single night, just like clockwork, as if it had already decided to be a punctual person. She told him she was thinking of naming her Emma, after Grandma Helen's middle name. She told him these small, warm, ordinary things because she believed that some part of him could still hear her, and because she was not yet ready for whatever was inside that envelope. Richard Ashford died on the 4th morning. He passed peacefully in the soft gray light just before sunrise, with his daughter's hand holding his wrist and the sound of birds chirping somewhere outside the window. Claire sat with him for a long time after he was gone. She did not cry yet. The crying would come later, when she was alone in a dark room. It was the kind of crying that comes from somewhere so deep inside that it doesn't even make a sound at first. Then she opened the envelope. Inside, there were 3 things: a letter in her father's handwriting, a thick stack of legal documents, and a smaller, sealed envelope with Ethan's name on it. It had a note that said, "When he is ready." The legal documents confirmed what Thomas Whitfield would explain in detail over the next few days. Every share, every smaller company, every holding company, every piece of property, every trust. The entire structure of the Ashford Empire, valued by international auditors at $30.2 billion, had been transferred into a single name, Claire Ashford. His daughter, his only child, the woman who had never once asked him for anything more than his time and his presence. She only ever wanted the lessons he carried in his hands and his voice. Claire read the documents twice, then she set them down on the bedside table, walked to the window, and stood there looking at the sky over Greenwich. The morning was arriving in shades of pale gold, completely indifferent to the fact that everything had just changed. She did not fly home. Not yet, because first she had a father to bury, and because she was building something in the silence that no one on the other end of this story could possibly see coming. Claire spent 2 weeks in Connecticut. She buried her father with a full ceremony. A man like Richard Ashford had earned 3 days of memorial services, with people whose lives he had touched flying in from all over the country to say things about him that made Claire understand parts of her father she had never known. She met with every board member. She read every single document in his study while sitting in his chair, at his desk, surrounded by his books and photographs. She asked every question twice if she needed to. She did not rush. She did not put on a performance. She simply absorbed everything her father had built over 30 years. And she let it all settle into her, the same way her grandmother's lessons had settled into her years ago. It became deep, permanent, and unshakable. She cried exactly one time. It was the night before she was scheduled to fly back to Charlotte. She sat alone in his study with the lights turned down low and held her grandmother's ring between her palms. She looked at a framed photograph on the desk. It was Claire at her college graduation, her cap sitting slightly crooked on her head, laughing at something her father had just whispered that no one else had heard. Richard was looking at her with a special kind of pride. It was not the kind of pride that asks for recognition. It was the deep, private kind that a father feels for his daughter, and he simply could not hide it. She stared at that photograph for a very long time. Then she put it down, stood up, smoothed her dress, and fully became her father's daughter in every way. But her time for justice had not yet come. Before Claire Ashford could have her moment, she first had to endure 3 challenges. These challenges would have broken anyone not as strong as she was. The first one happened at her father's memorial service. The public service took place at a large cathedral in Manhattan. There were 600 guests, including senators, chief executive officers of Fortune 500 companies, old money families, and media gathered on the sidewalk outside. Claire stood at the front, dressed in black and 7 months pregnant. She gave a eulogy for her father that was quiet, precise, and so full of love. The entire room fell silent for a full 10 seconds after she finished. And that is when Diane Bennett made her entrance. She had flown in from Charlotte without an invitation. She walked up to Claire afterwards in front of several guests, holding a sympathy card. She wore an expression of sincerity that looked like she had practiced it in a mirror. "I am so very sorry for your loss, Claire." Diane said it loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Marcus wanted to come, but he has been so busy taking care of the children all by himself. We all have been. Things have been so difficult since you went away." Her words landed exactly as she had planned. They were spoken publicly, in front of people who did not know the whole story. It painted Claire as a neglectful mother, even at her own father's memorial. A few hours later, a story without names appeared on a society blog. It said a tech tycoon's daughter was reportedly missing from her family while mourning her father. Sources claimed her marriage was in trouble. Claire's phone, they started buzzing nonstop. Friends, acquaintances, and Marcus's colleagues all called. They all asked if she was all right, but their questions hinted that she had abandoned her children. At the same time, back at Willow Creek Lane, Vanessa had already redecorated the master bedroom. The quilt that belonged to Claire's grandmother was folded up and put in a trash bag in the garage. Lily's drawings of birds were taken down from the hallway, and the growth chart on the pantry doorframe was gone. 10 years of pencil marks, dates, and children's heights, all written in Claire's neat handwriting, had been painted over, just like that. A new coat of white paint had covered a decade of a mother's love and care. Ethan called Claire that night. His voice was very level. It was the way an 11-year-old's voice gets when he is trying very hard not to fall apart. "Mom, when are you coming back home?" "Soon, my love. I promise." There was a pause. Then he said, "She threw away Grandma's quilt." Claire shut her eyes. He continued, "I got it out of the trash. It is safe under my bed." There was a long silence. "Mom, are you still on the phone?" "I am here, my love. I am always here for you." Claire hung up the phone. She sat on the edge of her father's bed, and she began to cry. It was not a quiet cry. It was not the kind you can just wipe away and move on from. It was the ugly kind. It was the kind of crying where your entire body shakes. You have to press a pillow over your mouth so that no one in the next room can hear you breaking down. She was 7 months pregnant. Her father had just been buried. Her children were being told that she had left them. And her home was being taken apart, piece by piece, by a woman who had walked in with suitcases and immediately started erasing her. Sometimes, everything bad happens all at once. Grief, betrayal, and a feeling of powerlessness all show up at your door at the very same moment. The most dangerous thing you can do then is to make a final decision based on a feeling that will not last. It is okay to cry. It is okay to fall apart and be messy. But you must not act until the storm is over. And the storm always passes. Claire's storm ended at 3 in the morning. She washed her face. She made a call to Thomas Whitfield, and then she started to make a plan. She believed the worst part was finished. She had no idea it was not even close. Claire's best friend, Sophie Parker, met her at the airport in Charlotte on a Thursday morning. She talked for the entire 40-minute drive without stopping for a single breath. "You have $30 billion, Claire. 30 billion with a B. You could purchase his whole company and turn it into a parking lot. You could purchase the parking lot next to it and build a giant statue of yourself. You could, Sophie. I am only pointing out that you now have choices. Very, very expensive choices." Claire almost managed to smile. Almost. She called Thomas Whitfield from Sophie's car. The transfer of the estate was finished. She now had a team of lawyers, endless money, and the complete legal power of the Ashford family name supporting every single document. She told Sophie she was going to her house to get her children. Sophie replied, "Go get your babies. Then we can figure out everything else." Claire drove to Willow Creek Lane. Her key did not fit in the lock, because of course it did not. So she rang the doorbell of her own house. She stood on the porch that she herself had painted 3 summers earlier, 7 months pregnant, and she waited. Marcus answered the door. Diane stood behind him with her arms crossed. Her face was arranged into what she likely thought was a look of concern. And behind Diane, visible down the hall, Vanessa was sitting on Claire's sofa. She was drinking from Claire's favorite coffee mug, looking completely at home, like a woman who believes everything she sees is already hers. Marcus handed her an envelope. Inside was a temporary restraining order. Marcus had filed it, claiming Claire had abandoned her family. He claimed she was emotionally unstable because of her grief. He claimed she was a danger to the children's welfare. This was all supported by a sworn statement from Diane, who claimed she had personally seen Claire acting emotionally distressed and behaving erratically. Claire was not allowed to enter her own home. She was not allowed to see her children. She was standing on her own front porch, holding a legal paper that said she was not permitted to be exactly where she was standing. As the door started to close, she looked up at the window upstairs. She saw Lily's face pressed against the glass. Lily silently mouthed one word. Mommy. Claire pressed her flat palm against the air that separated them. Lily placed her small hand on the window pane. Then, Diane's shadow appeared behind the curtain, and the curtain was pulled shut. Claire drove to a hotel. She just sat in the parking lot for 40 minutes before she found the strength to get out of the car. She called Sophie, who picked up on the very first ring. Where are you? What just happened? He got a restraining order. I am not allowed to see my kids. There was a pause so heavy it could have sunk a battleship. Sophie said, I need you to say that again, very slowly, because I am sure you did not just say what I thought you said. I need you. I am on my way now. Do not move. Do not call him. Do not do a single thing. I am bringing ice cream and a plan for revenge. Sophie showed up at the hotel room 40 minutes later. She had 3 pints of ice cream, a legal pad, and a look on her face that could have melted steel. She sat on the bed, opened a pint, and handed Claire a spoon. She said, Okay, we are going to finish this entire container of ice cream. Then, we are going to list every single person who has done you wrong. And then, we will figure out how to legally take down each one of them in alphabetical order. Diane is going first, because D comes before M and V. Also, I have wanted to take Diane down since Thanksgiving of 2019. In spite of everything, Claire laughed. It was the kind of laugh that escapes before you can stop it. It was wet and shaky, but it was real. Thomas Whitfield's legal team filed an emergency request, but the family court system is very slow, and the hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. 2 weeks. That was 14 days without being able to see her children. Ethan called her from a phone at his school during his lunch break. Mom, Jack will not stop asking for you. He sleeps with your sweater every night. Lily is not eating her breakfast. I am trying my best, but I do not know what to do. You do not have to do anything, my love. Just be a good brother. I am coming for you. I promise you, I am coming. She threw away your book, the one you kept on the nightstand. I was not able to save that one. There was a pause. But I saved the numbers from the growth chart, Mom. I wrote them all down before she painted over them. All of them. For every single birthday. I remember all of them. Claire pressed the phone tightly to her chest, shut her eyes, and just breathed through the pain. She breathed the way you breathe during childbirth. It was controlled, intentional, and she counted each breath. If you ever find yourself in a fight for custody, this is the most important advice I can give you. You must document everything, every single text message, every phone call, and every single interaction. Save it all in 3 different places: your phone, the cloud, and at your lawyer's office. The court is not interested in your feelings, no matter how right you are. The court is only interested in evidence. You need to be the person who has the most evidence. The hearing happened 2 weeks later. Thomas Whitfield's team took apart Marcus's restraining order in just 40 minutes. The judge was clearly not impressed by Diane's sworn statement. He noted that traveling to be with a dying parent does not legally count as abandonment in any way. The restraining order was thrown out. Claire was given temporary custody of the children. She drove directly to the house. The children came running to her before she even made it to the front door. Baby Jack wrapped his arms around her legs and refused to let go. Lily buried her head in Claire's shoulder and did not say a word for a full minute. Ethan stood back, with his arms crossed, trying to look strong. But when Claire opened one arm for him, he walked right into her hug and stayed there. Marcus was given 72 hours to leave the house. That night, as Claire stood in her home, holding her children, she thought, "It is finally over. I have my kids back. I have the estate. I can file for divorce, and this whole nightmare will be finished." But what Claire did not realize yet was that the absolute worst part was still 48 hours away. The first major blow came 2 days later. Claire collapsed on the kitchen floor. One second, she was filling a glass with juice for her son Jack. The next, she was collapsing to the ground. The glass shattered, and juice spilled across the floor tiles she had so carefully chosen 4 years earlier. It was a combination of stress, exhaustion, and dehydration. For 7 months, she had carried her baby through sadness, betrayal, and a legal battle, never once pausing to look after herself. Her son, Ethan, immediately called 911. He spoke to the dispatcher with a calm composure that no 11-year-old should ever need, but he had it. He balanced his little brother Jack on one hip, while using his other arm to keep his sister Lily in the room. He told the operator, "My mom is pregnant. She fell and is not moving. I need someone to come right now, please." At the hospital, the doctors were able to stabilize Claire and her unborn baby. However, they ordered her to stay on complete bed rest for the rest of her pregnancy. This meant she could not drive or go to any court hearings. She could hardly even walk to the bathroom without her friend Sophie or a nurse watching over her. Within 24 hours, Marcus's lawyer filed a motion. He argued that Claire was physically unable to care for her children and demanded that emergency custody be given back to Marcus. The second devastating blow arrived the very next morning. The Charlotte Business Journal ran a story about her. Someone had revealed that Claire was the daughter and only heir of the wealthy Richard Ashford. But the article was not a story of success. It was presented as a major scandal. The headline read, "Local mother concealed $30 billion fortune from husband for 11 years. In an instant, the entire story changed. Claire was no longer the poor, abandoned wife who deserved sympathy. She was now seen as the deceitful daughter of a billionaire who had tricked her own husband. The comments online were brutal. Marcus, with help from Vanessa, appeared on a local podcast. He perfectly played the part of the confused and betrayed husband, a role he seemed born to perform. "I never knew who her father was," he said, his voice trembling at all the right moments. "She hid that from me for our entire marriage. I do not even know the real her anymore. All I have ever wanted is what is best for my children." The third blow hit that same afternoon while Ethan was at school. During lunch, a classmate showed him the article on a smartphone. He could see the comment section clearly. Strangers were calling his mother a liar, a fake, and a rich girl who had cheated her own husband. Ethan lost his temper and punched the boy, which got him suspended. When Claire spoke to him from her hospital bed, his voice sounded different. It was no longer just quiet. It was broken. "They are all saying you lied to Dad. They say you are the bad guy. Everyone is saying it. Ethan, you have to listen to me." "But did you lie?" There was a long, heavy silence that seemed to fill the entire hospital room. "I did not tell your father about Grandpa's money," she admitted. "That part is true, but I never lied about who I am. I am still the same mom who made your lunch every single morning and read stories to you every single night. Then why does everyone think you are the bad guy?" Claire had no simple answer that an 11-year-old could understand. After the call, she lay in her hospital bed and just stared at the ceiling. She placed a hand on her stomach, feeling her baby girl kick. For the very first time in her life, a thought she had always pushed away came into her mind. Maybe I cannot win this. This was her true lowest point. It was worse than the restraining order, the locked front door, or the ambush at the funeral. Lying there in a hospital bed, unable to even hug her children, while the world decided she was a villain. Hearing her own son ask if she was a liar. This is the moment where most people would have broken. Claire Ashford did not break, but she came so close she could feel the hard ground just below her feet. When the world is against you and someone else is telling your story, your first urge is to fight back and explain yourself. Do not do it, at least not right away. Public opinion changes like the tide. It comes in and goes out. But court documents are like stone. You must focus on the stone and let the waves crash. The truth has patience. It will be there when you are ready. Claire could not physically move, so she made her plans from her hospital bed. Later, she continued from the guest room at Sophie's house during the last weeks of her pregnancy. She gave directions to her lawyer, Thomas Whitfield, and his team with quiet focus. It was a skill she learned from her grandmother, who taught her that the most important work is often done behind the scenes. She hired financial experts to look into Marcus's money. They found that he had been secretly taking money from their shared account for 11 months. He used it to pay for Vanessa's car, her apartment, their trips, fancy dinners, and some jewelry. Claire had found the receipt for it, but said nothing at the time. By then, she was no longer gathering evidence to confront him. She was gathering evidence for a courtroom. A private investigator confirmed that Vanessa was living in their house on Willow Creek Lane. She was sleeping in Claire's bed, driving Claire's car, and even wearing a necklace that belonged to Claire's grandmother. Vanessa had simply found it in a jewelry box and put it on as if it were a cheap trinket from a department store. Computer specialists recovered deleted text messages between Marcus and Vanessa from the past 14 months. One message from Marcus stood out. He sent it the day Claire left to be with her dying father. It was just 4 words that revealed everything. She is gone. It is time. Sophie came to visit her every day. She made it her job to get Claire to laugh at least once. One day, Sophie was looking at the financial records on Claire's laptop. He spent $4,200 on a weekend trip to Hilton Head with Vanessa. $4,200. Claire, I have seen this woman's profile online. She is not a $4,000 weekend. At best, she is a discount coupon for a Tuesday afternoon. Sophie, stop, Claire said. I am just saying, if you are going to destroy your marriage, you should at least aim higher. This is just insulting on every single level, including the financial one. And despite everything, Claire laughed. But the piece of evidence that changed everything, the one detail that turned Claire's sadness into something colder and sharper, came from the family therapist appointed by the court. In her official notes, the therapist wrote that Jack, who was only 3, had started to call Vanessa Mama. It was not a mistake or a moment of confusion. Marcus had been actively encouraging it. He was deliberately teaching his 3-year-old son to replace his own mother. He did this while that mother was carrying his sister and desperately fighting to be with him again. There is a special kind of anger that lies deeper than sadness, deeper than hurt, and even deeper than betrayal. It is the anger of a mother who finds out that someone has tried to wipe her from the memories of her own children. And it is the only kind of anger you ever need. Because once it appears, it does not go away until the job is finished. 3 weeks later, Claire gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She named her Emma, after the middle name of her grandmother, Helen. Her friend Duffy held one of her hands, and a picture of her father sat on the table beside her bed. She took time to recover and rest. Then, 8 weeks after Emma was born, she was ready. The Ashford Foundation was holding its yearly charity gala at the Plaza Hotel in Manhattan. For the very first time, the event would be hosted by its new chairwoman, Claire Ashford. The guest list was a collection of 600 of the most influential people from business, charity, and media in America. Claire made sure that an invitation was sent to Marcus's company, but her name was not on it. The event information only mentioned the Ashford Foundation. Marcus had seen that name on documents for years, but had never bothered to look it up. That was because Marcus Bennett was the type of man who never once did a search for his own wife's family name. That evening, Sophie was helping Claire get ready for the gala. She stood behind her, looking at their reflection in the mirror, and said, "You are about to go into a room with 600 people. You're going to reveal to your soon-to-be ex-husband that you are worth $30 billion while he stands there with the woman he cheated on you with. This is the most expensive act of revenge in all of human history, and I plan to enjoy every single second of it. Claire simply adjusted her earring. It is not revenge, Sophie. Oh, it is a little bit of revenge, and that is perfectly fine. When revenge is dressed up with class, it is still class. It just happens to have very good lawyers. The ballroom at the Plaza Hotel was the kind of place that made regular people feel tiny, but made powerful people feel right at home. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm golden glow on tables covered in white tablecloths and decorated with peonies and hydrangeas. A string quartet played softly near the entrance. Waiters moved silently through the crowd, carrying silver trays of champagne, flowing around guests like water moving around stones. Marcus showed up with Vanessa on his arm. He looked confident and at ease in his best suit, wearing the relaxed smile of a man who feels he belongs in any room he walks into. He saw his company's name on a table near the back and felt a small but pleasant sense of his own importance. Vanessa stood next to him, looking perfectly put together. She scanned the room with the sharp, calculating eyes of someone who is always measuring value. Diane was also there. Marcus had used his connections at his firm to get her an invitation. She was sitting near the front of the room with a glass of champagne, acting with the special kind of grace of someone who thinks that being close to wealth is the same as having it. Greg was standing by the bar, quietly drinking something dark. He looked, like he usually did, as if he would rather be anywhere else in the world. The host, a well-dressed man who had been friends with Richard Ashford for 20 years, walked to the podium. He spoke for a few moments, but with great warmth, about the foundation, its purpose, and the man who created it. He talked about how Richard believed the greatest thing a father could do was to raise a daughter who never needed to be rescued. And then, he said, "It is my incredible honor to introduce the new chairwoman and chief executive officer of the Ashford Foundation and Ashford Global Holdings." The doors at the far end of the ballroom swung wide open. There stood Claire, dressed in a custom-made ivory silk gown. It was not flashy or overdone, but simply and perfectly her. She began to walk forward, and a hush fell over the room before every single person rose to their feet. A wave of applause started at the front, with those who knew her name and understood this moment. It rolled through the hall, getting louder and louder until 600 people were standing and clapping. There were senators and chief executive officers, giants of the legal world, and major philanthropists. The entire elite of American business was there. Even those who had never laid eyes on her before knew that someone important was walking towards that stage. Marcus froze, his champagne glass stopping just before it reached his lips. Vanessa's smile vanished, like ice dissolving in warm water, slowly at first, and then disappearing completely. Feeling like she was melting from the inside, Diane clutched Greg's arm with both hands. Greg stared at the ground and mumbled, I warned you this would end terribly." Claire reached the podium and surveyed the audience. She did not bother to look for Marcus. She did not have to. For 12 minutes, she spoke about her father, about the meaning of legacy, and about building something not for yourself, but for the generations that follow. She shared memories of her grandmother's lake house in Vermont and the feeling of cold hands shaping pie dough. She talked about a quote on an index card she had kept with her for 25 years. It read, "A woman who can handle small pains will survive great ones." She mentioned a special quilt. She did not say whose it was or what became of it. She only said, "My grandmother stitched a quilt that has been in our family for 40 years. It was recently thrown out by a person who failed to see its worth. My 11-year-old son rescued it from the garbage and kept it safe under his bed. He understood its importance, even when the adults around him had forgotten." She paused, and the room was completely silent. That is what a legacy is. It is not about money. It is not about buildings. It is the thing your children save from the trash because you taught them it was precious. She did not glance in Marcus's direction even once. There was no need. Everyone who knew the situation, which was now everyone in the room, understood precisely what she was leaving unsaid, and the empty space where his name should have been shouted louder than any direct accusation ever could. When the speech was over, after the applause finally died down and the string quartet started to play again, Marcus made his way across the ballroom. He walked like a man who has just realized he has lost something huge and irreplaceable. He had not yet figured out whether he should plead for it back or argue. He spoke her name. She turned, and 4 lawyers materialized at her side. They moved with the smooth, practiced timing of people who had been waiting for this exact moment, prepared in a way Marcus could never have foreseen. Thomas Whitfield, a man with silver hair and an impeccable suit, carried the weight of his 31 years of legal practice in his posture. He held out an envelope. Marcus accepted it hesitantly. Inside, there were 5 separate documents. The first was a divorce filing, perfectly drafted and legally unstoppable. The second was a custody agreement, granting full custody to Claire and only supervised visits for Marcus, already filed and approved by a judge. The third was a detailed financial report. It tracked every single dollar Marcus had moved from their joint accounts, every payment made to Vanessa, and every lie he had told, now listed as a financial transaction. The fourth was a formal notice about the house on Willow Creek Lane, the house where he had changed the locks, moved his mistress into his wife's own bedroom, and told his children their mother had left them, was legally an asset of the Ashford Foundation. It had been for the past 8 years, ever since the deed was signed. It was a silent gift from her father, who had met Marcus for just 1 hour over a single cup of coffee. That was all the time he needed to see the truth and ensure his daughter would have solid ground to stand on if she ever needed it. Claire had never had to bring it up until this very moment. Marcus had 30 days to leave the property. The fifth document was a cease and desist letter addressed to Vanessa Cole for leaking stories to the media. It came with a short note from Thomas Whitfield that said, "The Ashford Foundation's legal team has 340 attorneys. I am confident we can settle this without involving all of them." Marcus just stood there, in his finest suit, in the middle of the Plaza Hotel ballroom, holding 5 pieces of paper. And for the first time in 11 years of marriage, Marcus Bennett was utterly speechless. Claire looked at him. There was no anger in her eyes, no victory, and not even sadness, though the sadness was very real and would stay with her for months. She would carry it like something precious that had been shattered. She looked at him the way you look at an object that once belonged to you, but now it is gone forever. It was a complete, clear, and final look. Then she turned her back and walked away. The lawyers formed a line behind her, closing the space like water flowing over a stone. The party moved on, and Marcus stood alone, finally understanding what his wife's silence had truly meant all along. What was coming was not karma. Karma feels like destiny. This was a consequence, and a consequence is simple math. Marcus lost the house. He wasted 28 of his 30 days in pure denial. He called lawyers who all confirmed the documents were ironclad. He called Vanessa, who eventually stopped picking up his calls. He called Diane, who had plenty of opinions but offered no real help. He ended up in a rented apartment on the other side of town that felt more like a waiting room because he had never actually built a home in his life. He had only ever occupied spaces that other people had created for him, and without Claire, the sum of who he was turned out to be much smaller than he ever thought. Vanessa's exit was quick and without any emotion. With no house, no money, and no social standing, and with 340 lawyers against her, The numbers just did not add up. She packed her Louis Vuitton luggage and left, offering no big explanation. Because women like Vanessa do not explain themselves. The accountants connected the dots. During the divorce, forensic specialists uncovered a shocking history. Vanessa had done this 2 times before. She had followed the exact same script in 2 other marriages. Her feelings for Marcus were never real. It was all part of a calculated plan. Standing on his driveway, Greg watched Vanessa pack her car and offered a small, sad wave. She drove away without looking back. He muttered to himself, "Of course, it all makes sense now." Diane had left Claire a voicemail that went on for 4 long minutes. She spoke of God, of family, of grandchildren, and why it was so important to forgive. Claire listened to the entire message. Afterward, she called Thomas Whitfield and made a specific request. She wanted the custody agreement to spell out the destructive role certain relatives had played in turning her children against her. She never called Diane back. Greg sent a short text message. It said, "I should have told you something. I'm sorry." Claire read it and thought about it for a while. She did not reply, but she did not block his number either. Claire was never a woman who was built for hate. She was built for precision, and there is a very big difference between the two. But the most surprising revelation was found in her father's old papers. Among Richard Ashford's private files, Claire discovered a letter he had written 2 years before he passed away. In it, Richard explained that he had hired a private investigator right after that single lunch meeting with Marcus. The investigator's report had identified Vanessa's role in everything. 11 months before Claire ever saw that text message on the kitchen counter, Richard had known all along, and he never told Claire. His letter explained his reasoning. "You are my daughter. You have the right to find the truth for yourself and choose your own path. I will not rob you of that power, but I will make certain you have a safe place to land when you do." The house, the foundation's resources, the legal protections, all of it. It was a father's quiet, long-distance love letter to a daughter he believed in completely. Claire read the letter just once, folded it neatly, and put it in the wooden box with all hit other letters. She then sat in the quiet for a very long time. It was a Saturday morning, 1 year later, the kind of special Saturday that is only known to a person who has gone through something that was meant to break them, but did not. Claire's at her kitchen table in the house on Willow Creek Lane. The house has been lovingly put back together. Her grandmother's quilt is on her bed again. The growth chart is back on the pantry door with all the pencil marks carefully redrawn from the notes Ethan had saved. Every birthday, every height, every child, and one new line at the very bottom. Baby Emma, 6 months old, 26 inches tall. Lily's drawings of birds are hanging on the walls again. There are new ones now, even better than before. She has been taking art classes. Claire just ended a video conference with her board of directors. She was calm, clear, and exact. She had the quiet confidence of a woman who has earned her place at the head of the table. She shuts her laptop, leans back in her chair, and takes a long, slow breath. Jack bursts in from the backyard, holding a flower he has pulled straight out of the garden, complete with roots and dirt. He offers it to his mother with the proud look of someone presenting a priceless treasure. Claire looks from the flower to her son, and she laughs. It is not a polite or careful laugh, but a real, deep laugh, completely open and free. It is the kind of laugh that belongs only to people who have stopped pretending and have finally started to live. Lily comes in next, holding baby Emma on her hip, copying the way she has seen her mother do it, already learning how to be someone's safe harbor. Ethan is the last to appear. He leans against the doorframe with his arms crossed, just watching his mother and his siblings. The tension that used to be in his face has finally gone away. He asks her softly, "Are you good, Mom?" Claire looks at her oldest child, her reliable one, the boy who had saved a quilt, memorized a growth chart, and never asked a single question that was not his business to ask. He had trusted her completely, without needing to know why. I am better than good, my love. I am right where I am meant to be. And the reality was, she had been all along. She never lost her temper. She did not demand the house. She felt no need to justify her value to a man who should have recognized it long ago. She just waited patiently. And when the moment arrived, she shut the door softly, just as she always did after tucking in her children. Emma was in her crib, and Jack was already fast asleep, still wearing one of his shoes. Lily mumbled a sleepy goodnight as Claire passed her room. Then, Claire paused at Ethan's doorway. He was sitting up, reading a book. "Ethan," she said softly. "Yes, Mom." "Your grandfather wanted you to have something. I was planning to give it to you when you were older, but I believe you are ready for it now." She passed him a little wooden box. Inside, he found a letter from Richard Ashford and a check. The note on the check said, "For the boy who protected the quilt." Ethan unfolded the letter and began to read. We cannot see every word, but we can make out the final sentence. "You must take care of your mother," it continued, "not because she is weak. She is anything but weak. But the people we love most need to be reminded that they are cherished. And often the strongest among us are the very last to hear it." Ethan carefully folded the letter and looked up at his mother. He gave a single firm nod. It was the nod of a boy who had just realized something profound about the man he hoped to become. Claire gently touched his hair, switched off the lamp, and walked back down the hall. For the first time in a long time, the house smelled like a home again. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel. And let me know in the comments, at what point did you know that Marcus had already lost everything that truly mattered? I look forward to seeing you again soon. As a final note, this story was thoroughly researched, written, and edited by our creative team. We aim to tell meaningful stories with genuine emotion and valuable lessons. Every character, scene, and word was chosen to entertain, to inspire, and to remind you that your self-worth is never defined by those who are unable to see it. Thank you for being here and listening.